Are you always looking for ways to get more out of the supplies you already have? Hi, I'm Jess from jesscrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. And today I want to share 10 ways that you can enhance your die cutting without any fancy, expensive tools. So these are maybe tips you've already heard before. Hopefully there'll be one or two new ones for everyone. And I think this is a great video for beginners because you don't always know or have thought about all of these different ways. And I have a couple of trays of leaf dies here that I'm going to use to demonstrate my ideas. My first thing that I want to mention is inking the edges. This is one of the first things that I did to enhance die cuts. And as you can see, putting a little bit of your existing ink on the edges can just add some extra color. And you can do this with blending brushes and coming in and putting a little ink on the side with the brush. That's a rather inexpensive tool. Or you can just take your ink pad itself, and this is what I used to do when I first started crafting and had a very limited budget, and I just kind of tapped it along the edges, and it still added quite a bit of interest without spending any extra money because the inks were something that I already had for other purposes and just made my die cuts look a little better. Another thing, super inexpensive, don't need anything extra, is to curl the edges. You can absolutely just do this with your fingers. So like leaves and flowers and many other things can look great with a little bit of like extra dimension. So rather than them laying flat on your card base, you might prefer them to kind of look like they're popping off a little bit. You can kind of see that there. You can, like I said, just do that with your fingers, or you can take like a pen or any round tool and just run it along there and curl it up, and that gives it even more dimension. We'll take a look at that one, and you see how it really stands off the card. And you know, I've seen there have been like fancy tool sets sold to do that. And there's just, you know, if you do it all the time and having a fancy tool set works for you, please, but that's a free thing you can certainly do. Draw on details. So I have this die here that has some details cut into it, so it cuts those little like lines into it. But what if you had a more plain die cut leaf and you wanted to add some interest to it? You could actually draw on a similar detail. So I usually like to look at the picture of it, and here you can see I have one that I already did, but I was like, okay, well there's just kind of a line down the center, and I don't have a lot of colors of marker, so I have like black and brown. Thought, oh, maybe brown will look a little better for this, but well, actually that's not true. I have markers, but not like drawing markers. I have like coloring markers, but you know, use whatever you have. And then there's a line down the center, and then the line kind of comes out to the side. So I'm just like using a reference. And, you know, maybe you take your time, maybe you practice on a few or practice on an off sheet of paper, and then you can draw on some of those details that a more, like a fancier die might have. Now, these are all from the same die set, just in case anyone wants to know. It's the Market Blooms floral set from scrapbook.com, but I'm just using a basic die to demonstrate. You can add sparkle. So I have taken a shimmer spray, another relatively inexpensive tool with many uses, or I guess product, and I just spritzed it onto the leaf so that it catches the light. I'm trying to kind of catch the light for you here, but my video is gonna not like to focus. I also like to use an old box that something was shipped in to protect my surface when I spray. So I put my leaf in there and spray, and then the box catches most of that. Okay, then adding shine, which I would call a little bit different than sparkle. So as you can see, this leaf catches the light and it's shiny. So even though I die cut it out of paper, I was able to put clear embossing powder over the top of it and melt that powder to make it shine. You can also use something like Glossy Accents from Ranger to add shine to smaller die cuts. You can add texture. The main way I would say to do this is with embossing folders. They're like a really simple way to add texture, but you can also add like texture paste. I've done things where like I've added a product called Cloud Whip from scrapbook.com to the top of a cup so that it looks like whipped cream. And that's another way of adding texture, but just running your die cuts through an embossing folder can add a lot. And in terms of keeping that inexpensive, now if you're die cutting, you have a die cutting machine, except for that if you've purchased die cuts, or if you have something like a Cricut that can cut a bunch of shapes for you, but doesn't work with embossing folders. And so I did try the tip today where I've heard people say that you can use an embossing folder by spritzing your cardstock with water and then rolling your rolling pin over it. It does not, I need more practice with it. It didn't work as well as an embossing folder, but you could get a little bit of texture and maybe you want a more subtle texture. So just something to consider. Again, I realize most people die cutting would have a embossing or a die cutting machine to put the embossing folder through. Okay, then you could spray on color. So here I had a white die cut and I used a spray. Sorry that my camera has trouble focusing, but I'm trying to kind of get close in on some of these for you. So that was just a Distress spray stain I had in my collection, but you could also take paint and flick it on as a sort of similar look. And again, you would want to use that spray box that you made for free to keep everything under control. And you can also use it to spray on texture even when you already have some, or sorry, spray on color even when you already have some color. So I put the same spray on an already green leaf to kind of add like a sort of modeling to it. And then you can stack them up. This is more for like, if you want your die cut to have a little more presence. I really like to do this with word dies. So this die cut, I've put a couple of pieces, like a couple of dies together to make it thicker. So here's one that's like just cut one time, and then here's one where I cut it 3 times and I glued it together. And it just has a little bit more presence on the card. This is especially helpful if you have really thin cardstock and you're like worried it's gonna get crinkled easily or something like that. You could add a little more presence. You can kind of flick it here. You can see that's very flimsy. This is has a lot more resistance to it. So stacking it up can really help. You can similarly add dimension by putting like foam tape behind it, or in this instance, I just took some scraps from my die cutting because when I die cut all of these leaves, I had all kinds of bits of cardstock left. I glued a bunch of them together and I put that behind. And so then again, it will pop off my card just a little bit as opposed to a flat die. Let's try to put those, oh, that's another dimensional one. Let's put a flat die and a popped one next to each other. Is the camera gonna, oh, there we go. Okay, so you see it just kind of comes off the page just a little bit. And then, I think I left this one off, so it's a bonus one, so maybe it's 11. You can color match your die cut to whatever else you're doing. So I cut a lot of these out of green cardstock, but you could potentially cut your die cut out of white cardstock and say, you know, you have a very specific green ink that you used for your sentiment or for something else, or like, but you don't have cardstock that matches it. You could instead take your white die cut and press your ink into it and swipe across, that kind of thing, to add some color. Now in this case with this extra texture here, where they have these little extra cuts, then those didn't get the color from this ink, but I think that can be interesting. You could go in with a little tool and fill that in so that it is all matched up, but I just wanted to show you that that's actually could be an interesting effect and option about adding that color secondary rather than just cutting it out of colored cardstock. Okay, my next tip would just be to cut it out of a fancy paper. So I cut this one out of glitter cardstock rather than just plain cardstock. You could do this holographic patterned paper, and just that alone, without doing anything extra, is going to make your die cut more interesting. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video by sharing it with your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.